Hi, I'm Pat Hubert, and welcome to South Dakota Professional Teaching Standards, the Danielson Framework. I'm going to facilitate this coursework, and we're going to start off our investigation of the Danielson Framework with a short PowerPoint presentation. I'm hoping that everyone... I want to briefly touch on our overarching course goals. And really, my goals for you, considering the fact that this is an introductory level and a 101 kind of beginner's level class, I really just want to help you develop a working knowledge of the framework. And I want to help you identify some examples of what evidence for the different components might look like. I want you to understand the different uses for the framework for teaching. And then I want to communicate the structure of the framework for teaching so that you can begin an implementation process. My expectations, in order for this class to really work and for everyone to get the most out of the class, I'm hoping that each of you will participate fully. And by participation, I mean discussion. I mean keeping up with the reading and watching the videos that are posted. I'm looking for collaboration within the discussion boards. I'm looking for good questions from each of you, questioning each other and questioning me. And if we all kind of follow through with these expectations, then I think everyone will get the most bang for their buck when it comes to this learning experience. The goals for the first module really are these. I just want to go over the foundation of the framework, basic information about the framework. I want to talk about the framework vocabulary and how important that is. We want to take a peek at cognitive engagement and constructivist learning, which is the heart of the framework. We want to talk a little bit about evidence and opinion when it comes to teacher evaluation and evidence collection. And then we want to look at the levels of performance. All of these things are going to come in handy. Typically, I wouldn't necessarily go through evidence and opinions or the levels of performance until after we really looked at the domains. But I'm going to ask you to go in and do classroom observations as we talk about the domains. And so I think it's important that we have a good idea about evidence collection and those different levels of performance prior to you going in for your observation in order to make those the most valuable learning experiences that we can. So if you did watch the video with Charlotte Danielson, you will have heard her say this. She says, because teaching is so very complex, it is helpful to have a roadmap through the territory structured around a shared understanding of teaching. And that's exactly what the framework is. It's just putting into words exactly what good teaching is. And she's done a fantastic job of creating rubrics, which nobody understands a rubric like teachers understand a rubric, in order to develop some learning targets for teachers. I know we've all been talking about assessment for the last 10 years and how important it is for students to have learning targets. And it is equally as important if we want to see improvement and growth and development in teachers to have learning targets for them as well. That's exactly what the framework is all about, creating that common understanding for growth and development. So having said that, I just want you to take a minute, grab a little piece of scratch paper here, and I want you to jot down a few things. I want you to think about sitting in a classroom and observing a highly effective teacher at work. And I want you to think about what you might see or what you might hear in that classroom while you're observing. And I want you to jot down 3 or 4 examples of what you might see, what you might hear the teacher or the student saying or doing as you observe the classroom, as you watch them in action. What are you seeing and what are you hearing? Write down a couple of examples real quickly. Just set that aside and we'll come back to it. Right now I want to talk about benefits for any framework for teaching. putting a good framework for teaching in place, regardless of whether it's the Danielson framework or another framework, has benefits. And those benefits include a common language, a shared language, so that everybody knows and everybody's on the same sheet of music when it comes to what good teaching is. There's also that idea of self-assessment and reflection on practice. That is a benefit regardless of what evaluation framework you're using, as well as the structured professional conversations that happen on self-assessment and reflection in practice. Now, in terms of the Danielson framework, there are some deal breakers, and I like to talk about these right up front, because if these deal breakers really aren't in place, then this is the place to start. And that is the nature of professional learning. Things like trust, self-assessment and self-directed inquiry, reflection on practice, collaboration and conversation, and a community of learners. Those are all things that if these things are not in place in your building, they really need to be prior to trying to implement a framework like this, because the success of the framework hinges on these elements. And so if you don't have a very trusting environment, if you don't have teachers who trust one another, who trust themselves, and who trust you, then making this be a success is going to be a lot harder. It's also very important that there is a value, an outward value placed on reflection, placed on collaboration, placed on self-assessment on a regular basis, and assessing our own professionalism in order to grow. And I would suggest that if these things are not in place, then you work on that first. And if you feel like they are in place, it still doesn't hurt to go back and maybe survey your staff about what they think about the nature of professional learning in their building, and find out if they really, really do feel like there is value placed on these elements. There are common themes within the framework, and these themes revolve around students. These are student-centered themes, and they are equity. All students are equal. All students are have equal opportunity in terms of learning. All students are valued equally, and we value them and their cultural competence. So we understand our different students' cultures, and we value each of them. And along with that, we have high expectations for all students, for those who are gifted, for those who struggle, for those who are easy to have in the classroom, and those who are more difficult to have in the classroom. Everyone has high expectations. And we have developmental appropriateness for all students. So I am hopefully considering that as I'm developing my instruction, and I'm making developmentally appropriate decisions about how I deliver, how I assess, and how I differentiate in my classroom. With that comes the focus on individuals, including the special needs folks in your classrooms, appropriate uses of technology, and most importantly, a student assumption of responsibility. And those of you that have been working with the Common Core know that along with critical thinking, along with deep levels of thinking, comes student responsibility in the classroom. They need to be responsible for their learning, and they need to have conversations and articulate their thinking and take more assumption of responsibility, which is kind of sometimes hard to give up, but absolutely critical. There are a number of different uses for the framework for teaching. The first one that comes to our mind right now, of course, is the one that South Dakota is looking at, and that is for evaluation of teacher performance. However, it's a very important tool in teacher preparation. I think at the university in Vermilion, as well as other state schools, the framework is being incorporated into teacher prep programs. It's also being used, I know, as a supervisory tool for student teachers, those who are supervising teachers out there doing their student teaching. And it's a great tool for you as administrators in terms of recruitment and hiring. This is a tool that pre-service teachers who are learning about this tool will look to you to have this in place, and they will find this as an asset. And there's also great uses for it in terms of structuring your professional development. This is a great way to look at your data from your teachers. See if there are trends in terms of areas of weakness. See if there are people who are really off the charts in certain areas that could be called upon to lead some professional development, and use those teacher evaluations to drive some of the PD in your schools. Let's move right into terminology and vocabulary. We'll take a quick look at the different important vocabulary, starting off with domains. There are 4 domains within the framework, and these are the 4 domains, and they break down sort of like this. We have domain 1, which is planning and preparation. That's everything that teachers do in preparation for instruction to happen. So it's everything that they do in order to plan that lesson out to make sure that every student in the classroom is engaged and is learning. Then we have domain 2, which is the classroom environment. That's the things that your teachers do in order to create an environment that honors, respects, and looks to an environment that fosters academic risk-taking. And again, I'm going to go back to the Common Core on this, because if your students are not taking academic risks, then they're not going to be reaching the high level that is called for in the Common Core. And if you do not have a classroom environment that sets up a standard for that, then kids will have a hard time hitting it. So this is that environment that fosters good discussion, good dialogue, a good structure for questioning each other, and for hitting those really deep critical thinking sort of standards. Then you have 3, which is instruction and assessment, and this is the heart of the framework. It's what happens in the classroom to make sure that those kids learn. It's everything they do, everything they actively do in the classroom to make that happen. And then we have professionalism, which is domain 4, and that is all of those professional responsibilities that teachers have day in, day out, outside of the classroom, that really make them the professionals that they are. If we go one step deeper, you can see underneath our domains we have components. So we have 4 domains, and then our components are broken down A, B, C, D, and so on. And there are 22 total components, and under each one of the components are elements. So we have 4 domains, 22 components, and 76 elements. Each one of these elements has a rubric that is attached to it that outlines exactly what the element requires in order to be scored. This is a breakdown of each of the components under the domains, and you can see that they, as I said, they're broken down by A, B, C, D, E, and F in some cases. Domains 1 and 4 have 6, and domains 2 and 3 have 5 components. So this is what a rubric looks like at the elemental level. The breakdown looks like this. We have domain 2 at the top, and underneath that you have the name of the component. This is 2A, creating an environment of respect and rapport. The 2 elements that make up creating an environment of respect and rapport are teacher interaction with students and student interactions. And you can see that each of these 2 elements have 4 different levels of performance. And the levels of performance are unsatisfactory, basic, proficient, and distinguished. And at this point, I'll tell you that Charlotte Danielson says that distinguished is not likely to be a place where your teachers live. It's a place where teachers visit. It's not, even your best teachers don't live in distinguished, because teaching is so hard, and because distinguished teaching really requires so many things to go perfectly right at the same time. It's hard to get to distinguished. And this is kind of a good and a bad thing. The good thing is that it outlines what distinguished is. So we do know what it is to get there. But we also know that as teachers like to be at the very far end of a rubric. And sometimes teachers who find themselves performing in the proficient level of performance, they may find that difficult to deal with. However, they just need to know that distinguished is hard to get to. And when you get there, it's a really fabulous thing. So again, just to highlight again, we have two elements underneath this domain and component. This is 2A, creating an environment of respect and rapport. So now that we have taken a look at the 4 domains, I would like you to take a minute and look back onto that list of 3 or 4 things that you wrote down that you might see or hear in a classroom that was really working. And I want you to just think about those things, and tell me, where might you put those things that you might see or hear, those little bits of evidence? How might you sort them in terms of domain? Do those things belong in domain 2 or in domain 3? Domain 1, domain 4, every little bit of evidence has a place. And so just think about them and just write down next to the notes that you made, is it a domain 2? Is it a domain 3? Where might it fall? Domain 3 is really the heart, as I said, of the framework. And under domain 3, we really have a focus on cognitive engagement and constructivist learning. And so I'd just like you to take a minute now and write down, just jot down on a piece of paper, a definition, your definition for cognitive engagement. What is cognitive engagement to you? What does that mean to you? And so now that you have a definition written down, I'd like you to go back into your book, pull out your book, and particularly read or maybe reread pages 15 through 17, and take a look at Danielson's definition of cognitive engagement. And see what you think. See if there's anything you'd like to add or change about your definition of cognitive engagement and constructivist learning. So having read those few pages, I want you to go back to your definition and think. Think about your notes on quality practice. Think about those notes that you sorted into your domains, those 3 or 4 ideas. And where would you, what might you see or hear in your classrooms that is evidence of engagement specifically? What of those 3 or 4 things that you wrote down really have to do with engagement? I think oftentimes we tell teachers that we need to see the students be more engaged. Or conversely, we say, wow, they really looked engaged. But we don't really have evidence of engagement. And this is the big idea here, that we're going to start collecting evidence of engagement, and I'm going to help you do that by figuring out what engagement looks like. And that's exactly what we're going to do. I want you to go ahead and go to the discussion board and respond to the prompt there about cognitive engagement and what it looks like. Try to think deeply. Try to use classroom examples, things that you've seen, things that you witnessed in the classroom as cognitive engagement was actually happening. And just keep in mind, I give extra points for those who ask good questions of each other. So if someone posts something and you have a question for them, don't hesitate. Throw it up there and let's have a good dialogue about this, okay? Now, next time when you come back, we will, now that we have our definition of cognitive engagement, we're going to take a better look at what it looks like by delving into domain 3 itself. And we'll talk about collecting evidence through the observation process. If you have any questions, again, please let me know. And this PowerPoint will stay up here throughout the course so that you can review it if necessary. Thanks.